Our story begins with Sorata Kanda, our protagonist, thinking how he pretended it was someone else's fault that nothing happened, though he was just dreaming. But he's startled by his roommates, Misaki Kamigusa, who slept there without him knowing as he escapes. Though is then surprised by Chihiro Sengoku, his very lazy teacher and dorm supervisor, dressed trying to find a man, who forces him to fix the sign of their dorm, Sakura Hall, where the problem kids from Sumai High School are sent to, or a den of freaks per Kanda, who lives with Misaki Kamigusa, a third-year student, an incredibly extroverted girl and gifted genius at animation. Jin Mitaka, another third year, a calm and intelligent guy, and a scriptwriter, and a huge and Ryunosuke Kasa, a first-year, extreme recluse who hates women, a computer master who's developed an auto-reply AI program named Maid-chan. And Kanda describes himself, a first-year general studies student considering himself average at everything, whose goal is to escape from Sakura Hall. Later at school, Kanda's exhausted as his friends Miyahara Daichi and Nanami Aoyama talk about him leaving Sakura Hall. But he can't, as Aoyama remembers how Kanda adopted a stray cat and hid it in the norms, but he was caught, so the principal made him choose between abandoning it or going to Sakura Hall. He accepted the latter and planned on finding the cat a home and leave after the first semester, but he ended up adopting 6 more strays instead. Though they then talk about how Aoyama works at multiple jobs, needing the money for her voice acting school since she came to Osaka on her own. Later, Kanda meets with Chihiro, who forces him to go to the station at noon to find her cousin Mashiro Shina, an art student transferred from England, will stay at Sakura Hall. On the way, he's greeted by his shop owner's friends, though he's told how ambitious he is since he left his parents' home. But Kanda later ponders on that, thinking maybe he should go back. But as he sees a cherry blossom fly off, he spots Shina. He approaches her, but she acts seemingly emotionless, asking what color do you want to be? But not knowing what he wants to do in the future, Kanda answers he's currently iridescent. So he asks that back, and she responds with currently probably white. Kanda then introduces himself and why he's there, but Shina simply says that she likes the name Sorata, surprising him. Later, they've arrived at Sakura Hall, and Misaki's made a welcome banquet, and then she screens the welcoming anime she made for Shina, which looks really well done, but it's because it was rather a check for her new animation, as Jin then begins talking with her about its flaws, becoming engaged in that. Though then, Kanda thinks Shina doesn't care about him, thinking she must think he's worthless compared to her. Though he thinks on how, after adopting his first cat, Ikari, he realized the days weren't boring, but rather himself for being like someone else. The next day, Kanda asks Chihiro why didn't Shina go to the regular dorms, so he's told this place suits her, and she asks him to look after Shina and make sure she's ready for school. So he goes to Shina's room, but she won't answer, so he peeks and finds a huge mess. But trying to find Shina, he spots manga on her computer, finding the drawings great, but that it's a very short love story. But he's startled by Shina, who slept underneath her desk. To his shock, but she acts indifferent, so Kanda hands her a shirt, telling her to get ready. But she only wears that, but now she won't care about choosing. So Kanda forcefully throws one at her. And after that, she's made a mess in the bathroom, and also didn't put a because Kanda didn't hand her any. So Kanda cleans the mess, but Shina then asks what iridescent was, and he explains it's a rainbow, ambiguous color. So Shina says he's interesting to his surprise, and they then head to school. Kanda talks to his dorm mates about Shina. Since she's a little different and can't lead a normal life, he wants to alternate looking after her. But seeing him clean her crumbs, they decide he'll be the one on Mashiro duty, to his dismay. Though, Shina tells Kanda she hopes they'll be friends, which he also does. Later though, Kanda tells Misaki he can't be on duty since he'll leave Sakura Hall soon. Though Shina then shows up in only a shirt because Misaki told her Kanda would like that, so he sends her back to her room. Later, at a store, Kanda worries about spending too much, only for Shina to eat cushions without asking, but he then sees Aoyama working there. So later they head to school, but Aoyama's curious on who Shina is, so he introduces her. But Shina says Sorata's her first boy, and that she's glad Sorata was her first, which makes Aoyama run away shocked. Though she meant that he's her first male friend, to Kanda's dismay. Afterwards, at school, Kanda's found by Chihiro drinking tap water since he used all his money on Shina, but Chihiro tells him to turn in his career plan. Later, Shina goes to Kanda's classroom to tell him she'll go home alone. He rejects this, but seeing everyone's looking gives in, though Aoyama's pissed. Though later, he spots Sheena outside, talking to someone. She's Ayano Ada, who asks Sheena if it's hard being away from Rita. Though she claims she has Kanda, but then she enters the store Aoyama works at and explains that Kanda's her first male friend ever, since Kanda wanted her to know the context, which leaves Aoyama wildly embarrassed for what happened. Later, Kanda arrives home, but finds tons of cabbages, leading to Jin's room, who's arrived, explaining it's Misaki's doing since it's his birthday, whereas last year she covered herself in whipped cream. And in his room there's cabbages and a huge gift, which Misaki pops out from, covered in gift wrap, and jumps at Jin, but falls on Kanda. But Jin quickly covers her, though Kanda escapes, leaving him alone to his dismay. Afterwards, Kanda thinks on how he's got to leave Sakurasou ASAP, though he still doesn't know what to study. Though then, Sheena arrives, but she takes him to her room and asks him to his clothes. She explains Ayano, her editor, saw her work in a new manga artist competition, and though she didn't win, she complimented her art style. But that, since delicate expressions of emotion are difficult for her, she tried for more extreme depictions. So Kanda gives in and his clothes besides his. But Sheena then begins touching him, and then gets on top of him and forces him to hold her. But then she asks if he's had complimenting his body. But shocked, he denies it and explains his body's like that because he used to play soccer. But wanting to know why he stopped, he explains he wasn't good enough in the end. But Sheena then gets off and begins drawing. Kanda then spots a new manga artist event pamphlet and figures she'll rejoin, though he then tries to put on, but Sheena won't let him, saying they'll keep going, and that she won't let him sleep tonight, to his shock. In the morning, Kanda sees Misaki eating cabbage, but she appears disappointed. After that, Kanda spots Aoyama outside, who's nervous for yesterday, but then calms down. They talk about Sheena, as Kanda says she was to be a manga artist, working hard at it, which makes him want to cheer her on, but that it's the same with Aoyama, finding amazing how she works multiple jobs for her dream, making her blush, so she nervously leaves. Kanda's left thinking on how they are amazing, but wonders that, despite not being as good as his friends, if he'll be able to find something someday. Though afterwards, he sees a beautiful drawing in a book, complimenting it, but Sheena says thanks, because she drew that, as he later looks her up and sees she's a master painter. Kanda, taking a bath, ponders on Sheena being a master painter, who then enters, shocking him, wanting better shower references, so she sprays his face and then goes draw, but Kanda's frustrated, asking who's the one who needs to work hard. Later, he hears Jin telling someone Misaki can't work in a group and hangs up. He's explained it was an Animen studio producer wanting to give Misaki a better script for her next project, since basically, Jin's scripts aren't good enough, though he knows that. Jin though sees Candace feeling down, so they talk and realizes Candace bothered that the girl he thought was useless is actually a world-renowned painter. Kanda says he's the only one at Sakura Hall without talent, but Jin points out he's moving out, but points out he hasn't looked for cats' owners. He tries to excuse it with Sheena, but Jin says he'll take over Sheena and the cats if he wants to leave. But Kanda won't answer, so he's told to decide where he wants to be, tired of listening to him pretending he's leaving. But Kanda, pissed, affirms he'll leave and leaves the room. Though, Chihiro heard this and tells Jin he shouldn't take his anger out on others. After that, Kanda frustratedly looks at a game design audition advert, so he texts Ryunosuke, wanting to ask what does he need to become a game creator, but ends up not sending the message. The next day, Kanda looks for cat owners at the school, helped by Aoyama, but Sheena claims she wants the cats, but Kanda says she's the one who needs an owner instead, to Aoyama's shock, though then Sheena asks him out, needing to go somewhere this Sunday, to Aoyama's further shock, but he rejects her, telling her to go with Jin instead. But on Sunday, Misaki breaks down Kanda's door and forces him out, having found out Jin and Sheena are going out, and that they're going to Kanda's shock, so they them. They track their location with Maid-chan's help and rush to the mall, finding them. Though, they hold arms, utterly frustrating Misaki, but they're found by Aoyama, who also works there, so they Sheena and Jin, who they see buying a necklace. They leave afterwards, but Misaki's left sad, and Kanda, which Aoyama notices, so she heads back to work. Misaki though claims her hurts, and Kanda claims the same, seeing them both together. After that, they followed them to the but Misaki's had enough and goes home. But Kanda, furious, rushes at Jin, trying to punch him, but he's accidentally punched instead. But later, he awakes on Sheena's but in the hotel room. But Sheena says Jin's left because things went as he planned and that Can'd take care of her. Canda's confused, but Sheena takes her off going to take a bath, but Can'd tells her to think before acting, asking what if something happened if she came here with a man, but Sheena says she's only here for reference for her art. But she asks why is he here, since he said he was busy. He won't answer, so she says he's the one who doesn't understand and goes take her bath. Afterwards, through call, Jin apologizes, but Can'd demands him to go home, for Misaki's sake. But frustrated, Jin explains he can't today, looking at the necklace, whispering that when she looks, he wants to do her like crazy, though Can'd didn't catch that. Can'd then explains Sheena's asleep in the bed while he's on the floor because they fought, but that he didn't understand drawing manga was everything to her until now. Jin says she said she came to Japan to become a manga artist, but he said that was a waste of her talents, but Sheena didn't care about that. And Can'd says, thanks to her, his eyes are open and will decide for himself where he wants to be, though she was listening. The next day, Can'd apologizes for yesterday, as he was the one who didn't understand. But Sheena asks if he's leaving Sakura Hall. Can'd prepares to move out, while thinking on how he told Sheena that he felt if he stayed at Sakura Hall, he'd hate himself, and that he intended to leave from the start. But since then, Sheena worked restless every night on her manga, sending her finished work on deadline day, while Can'd is almost done giving away all the cats. Though, Misaki then surprises him, showing Sheena wearing a yukata, but he's only curious to why is she dressed like that, so they call him stupid and leave, as Jin explains she wanted him to compliment her, as he hands him a yukata since they're celebrating Tanabata. Later, they hold a festival, but Jin then sees Misaki's wish of firing laser beams, but on the back that she wishes he'd look at her someday. Meanwhile, Sheena doesn't know what to wish, so Can'd says to wish to win the award, but Sheena claims she'll win it herself. As Can'd says she's amazing, she's then written a wish and goes hang it, but it begins raining, so they cancel the festival. But later, Jin thinks that he can't give Misaki the necklace. Meanwhile, Sheena gets called by Ayano, while Misaki points out she isn't wearing Jin's necklace, as Can'd explains it was a misunderstanding. But after hanging up, she says she wasn't selected to the New Artist Award. Can'd tries to console her, but he thinks he doesn't mean to say those things, as Sheena leaves to her room and Can'd, frustrated, rushes outside. Later, Jin's found him, and he talks about Misaki's new anime having been well received, but that he wanted her to fail badly. At this, Can'd says he's actually a little relieved Sheena wasn't selected, so Jin explains that talent unconsciously destroys everyone around it, and that there are people too talented in realms ordinary men can't reach. And despite Misaki not caring about talent, he doesn't know how to accept their differences, and until the day he can proudly stand by her side, he can only struggle in vain. Can'd asks if he likes Misaki, but Jin hits him with his umbrella and then they leave, but Can'd asks if Sheena will be okay. Back home, he finds programming books from Ryunosuke as a parting gift. Through text, he asks him if getting close to talent will destroy him. So with Maid-chan, he's told to not talk about being destroyed until he's read those books to as Can'd finds that true, while Sheena's crouching. The next day, she won't open her door, so he leaves her breakfast outside, and later he cleans the festival decorations up, but sees Sheena's wish, wishing for Sorata's wish to come true. At school, he wonders what she meant. Aoyama then accompanies him look for cat owners, but she notices he's off, so she asks if he's sure of doing this. But then, a car suddenly stops, but it's Ayano who wants to talk with Can'd. So they go to a cafe and shows him Sheena's manga, Nanohana Hall, explaining, since her stories are weak, she told her to use events at Sakura Hall as reference, but Can'd sees their genders have been reversed. But that it ends with the girl leaving Nanohana Hall, a sad ending that costed her the award, which Ayano told her to fix but was ignored because that was Can'd's wish. At this, Can'd rushes to the school, handing Chihiro a paper saying he has to start here, his career plan of media studies. While Sheena thinks on how, she was told to write the ending she wanted, while Can'd thinks that his wish isn't to leave Sakura Hall. He then arrives home and tells Sheena from outside her room that he submitted his career plan, wanting to be a game designer, saying he's always been interested but was afraid of failing, so he gave up, but that seeing her made him want to try harder, wanting to be like her someday. But he notices her breakfast still there, so he opens her door and sees her asleep on her desk as she spent all night drawing. Though he then sees her manga, with her new ending, the girl wanting to stay at Nanohana Hall. She then gets called, but tells Can'd to answer it, so he does, and it's Ayano. And then he tells Sheena that she's going to make her manga debut as they've chosen to print her manga in next month's issue with a fixed ending. But Sheena begins crying, not knowing why, as Kanda congratulates her, but Sheena then asks him to call her by her first name. He refuses at first, but then gives in, saying Mashiro, as she says, "I knew it," and smiles. Though, Jin and Misaki were watching and tease him with something he wants to say. So Kanda asks to stay at Sakura Hall, and they celebrate as Kanda thinks on how he pretended it was someone else's fault that nothing happened. But that he was wrong. And that Sakura Hall is a mix of all colors, which will probably never change. Sheena's failed all her exams, so she has to take makeup ones, but Misaki then enters through the window via her personal elevator and tells Sheena to memorize the answers, which she does, imagining them as pictures to Kanda's shock. Misaki then makes him play a video game all day, with Sheena beating Kanda somehow. Kanda talks to Jin about summer break, saying he wants to finish his game pitch, but then Misaki comes and drags Kanda in to take revenge on Sheena. The next day, Sheena takes her makeup exams, but Kanda gets angrily called by his sister since he promised to go home during summer break, but he forgot, so he hangs up. After that, Aoyama finds him, who's there because she was late paying her rent, and they call her parents if it happened again. But she's then called to work, so she leaves. Sheena then comes back, having aced all her exams, but they spot Jin at school. On the way back, Kanda wonders why was he there, but he then spots Aoyama working, so he holds her. Later, she explains she was just lightheaded, but Kanda tells her to ask her parents for money if she's in trouble, but she can't because they're opposed to her voice acting and only let her study it if she lived on her own. At this, Kanda offers her to live in Sakura Hall, next to Sheena's room, but Sheena asks why isn't he calling her Mashiro and then falls asleep because Kanda didn't let her sleep at all last night, wildly shocking Aoyama. Though he explains they were playing video games, Aoyama decides to move in and find the truth by herself. And the next day she's moved in, greeted by all the cats, which Kanda's gotten back. But Misaki spooks her, so the boys come as she throws her everywhere. But Sheena then comes, wanting Kanda to clear her shirt of spilled tea, but Aoyama goes with her to her room, but it's a mess. Aoyama understands Kanda's situation, but she chooses to be on Mashiro duty from now on, but it's messy. At night, Sheena wants Kanda to fold her, but Aoyama stops her, but she sees Kanda's game pitch for his audition. Though, Sheena leaves after Aoyama says she'll get in Kanda's way. Afterwards, Aoyama kept taking care of Sheena, and thanks to that, Kanda's finished his pitch sooner. Ryunosuke reads it but says it's not good enough as Maid-chan explains what he did wrong to his frustration. Later, Kanda's asleep but Sheena goes sleep next to him. Kanda finds out she hasn't slept much due to making her storyboards, and being told her manga debut is the 10th, he says to go buy it together. But she's fallen asleep, so he goes sleep to the living room but finds Aoyama asleep there. So he puts a blanket on her, but she punches him, thinking he snuck into her room, but sees it's the living room and apologizes. She fell asleep studying her lines for her presentation, the 10th. Kanda tells her to stop with Mashiro duty, since she's busy already, but she won't, and they get mad at each other after he calls her stubborn. But Jin heard their argument and says to make up with her later. Aoyama wakes Sheena up, but she wonders where Kanda is. They go to the laundry room, finding Kanda sleeping there, but Aoyama's not mad anymore, so they talk, but Sheena looks sad, as Aoyama later figures she must prefer Kanda, but she won't quit. Later, Aoyama's at voice acting class, but she's falling asleep, though she's told they count on her for their group to pass. At night, she makes everyone dinner, but Sheena's asleep, so she leaves hers there, noticing her to boost the 10th as well, but sees her shirt buttons loose, so she fixes it. But Kanda and Sheena realize she's on edge. Later, Kanda talks to Jin about her, saying she'd stop doing everything by herself, and they help each other out. But Jin had an impression of her. Though, Jin tells him since she's been alone since she's left home, she must feel like doing everything by herself. After that, Kanda trips on a book of Osaka art colleges and finds out Jin will leave to Osaka next year, but he'll tell Misaki this himself. After that, in his room, Kanda talks to himself about that, but Misaki, on his window, almost found out, but didn't clearly hear. But then, Misaki claims to want to be Jin's girlfriend, but doesn't know how to make it happen. But Kanda then has her play video games with him, cheering her up. The next day, the 10th, Kanda submits his pitch at last, but Sheena then tells him Aoyama's off. She tries to leave for her audition, but she's exhausted, so they have her rest. They figure they can't let her go, but at this, Sheena says if it were her, she'd go, and begs them to let her go. They accept, but Aoyama trips, so Chihiro comes and sees she has a fever, telling her to stay. But the taxis arrive, so they rush to it, while Jin holds Chihiro, and she leaves with Kanda and Sheena. Though after arriving, they see she's exhausted, and Sheena blames herself for this. They then go to a store, but Kanda remembers it's Sheena's debut date and sees Nanohana Hall printed. But Sheena only awaits for Aoyama, but later she exits her audition, but being told by a girl that she only caused trouble. Aoyama apologizes to Kanda, recognizing she was stubborn, but Kanda knows she was doing her best, making Aoyama cry, as she wanted to hear those words. Afterwards, at home, Kanda talks to Jin and Misaki, saying he now understands Jin's impression of Aoyama, as she always had to fight by herself and didn't want to give in to weakness, thinking she'd give up again and again. Meanwhile, Sheena looks over Aoyama the entire day and night. Kanda then hands her soup, but sees her talking to her doll, to her embarrassment. But Kanda then tries to feed her, so she nervously accepts. But Kanda notices Sheena, who held Aoyama's hand all night. At this, Kanda recalls it was because of Sheena that they let Aoyama go, as Aoyama realizes she'd have regretted not going. Sheena then awakes and is glad to see Aoyama okay. Though Aoyama hands Kanda back the Mashiro duty, as she can't manage it, and he accepts. She apologizes to Sheena, but she asks Aoyama to call her Mashiro, which she does, and she then falls asleep again, to Aoyama's dismay. A kid arrives at Sakura Hall, but finds Sheena in a towel as Kanda, trying to give her slips on a banana peel and falls on her. But a kid's Kanda's sister, Yuko, shocked seeing this. Afterwards, she's mad at Sheena, so Kanda calls his mom, explaining Yuko's there, but she knows because she insisted on going after she told Yuko Kanda lived with a girl in secret, to his dismay, and hangs up. But Sheena and Yuko then argue, as Sheena says Kanda's her owner, to her shock, making Kanda mad. While that happens, Misaki crazily takes her driver's exam. Aoyama then returns home, but sees Kanda hugged by Yuko, so she figures he's a but he explains it's his sister. But Yuko's mad at seeing another woman, but wanting to show there's also men, he tries to have Ryunosuke come help, but he sends Maid-chan, telling him to shut up, and Yuko gets mad seeing a third woman. But they see the hallway's a river now, as Sheena says the bath just broke. Afterwards, Candace fixed it, but Yuko wants him to go home though. Sheena then comes, saying it's ready, while touching her stomach, making Yuko attack him, but she meant dinner. Afterwards they eat, but Kanda sees rice on Yuko's cheek, so he takes it off and eats it. But Sheena tries the same, but Aoyama takes it off instead. But Sheena and Yuko are now gluing rice to their faces, to Kanda's dismay. Though, Jin now wants to take a bath, but Kanda explains it's broken. So they all decide to go to a bathhouse, where Yuko measures the others. The next day, Kanda awaits for his pitch's results, and his room's crowded with girls. But Yuko now wants to go out with him, so they do, but accompanied by Aoyama, and Sheena, who says that Ayano told her to experience things this summer. But Yuko takes this as doing grown-up things, and Sheena says she slept in Kanda's bed already, which leaves Yuko utterly shocked. Afterwards, they explore a festival, but he's being held by Sheena and Yuko, and Aoyama. They then have fun at the festival, but after all that, on the way out, Aoyama trips, but is held by Kanda, embarrassing each other. But Aoyama then notices Sheena and Yuko are gone, so they try to find them but can't, as Sheena and Yuko left their phones home. Yuko meanwhile worries, but Sheena claims Kanda'll find them because he's on Mashiro duty, and they spot him, though he has to now pay for Sheena's apple. They then head home while he carries Yuko, and they talk about her entrance exams coming soon, hoping she passes, though they don't know where she's applying. The next day, it's time for Yuko to go back home, but at the train station, she reveals she'll apply to Suimei High, so she can be with Kanda, finding out it was Sheena's idea. Though then, Yuko tells Aoyama she won't let her have Kanda, leaving her embarrassed, but they then head back. And meanwhile, Misaki somehow passed her driving exam. Aoyama hands Kanda letters for him, but they see she's wearing glasses as she forgot to put on contacts, to her embarrassment, though Misaki jumps on her. Kanda sees it's a letter for his pitch, and finds out he's passed the first screening and is scheduled for a presentation the 31st. But in the other one, it just says, "Teach me about love," from Sheena. So later in his room, she explains Ayano told her the best way to write about love is by falling in love, saying the deadline's the 31st, but it's the same day as Kanda's presentation, so he can't help having to prepare for it. Aoyama then sees her, so she tries to take her out, but Sheena says she still hasn't been taught about love, making Aoyama mad at Kanda, but he explains what she meant. Though then Misaki comes and jumps on him, so he kicks them all out. But Sheena then asks Aoyama if she knows about love. Kanda then messages Ryunosuke about presentation advice, so he's told to wear a suit and to practice his presentation skills with his roommates. So the next day he does, but it's long and boring, so Kanda goes fix it. Though later at noon, he finds Sheena drawing in his room because she felt if she did it there, she'd understand what it means to love. She asks if she'd leave, so he says Aoyama would be annoyed if she sees her there. But she decides to stay, saying that he always thinks on Aoyama first, which confuses Kanda. The following days, Kanda rewrote the presentation and showed it to his roommates for 10 days straight, and the 31st then came. But before leaving, Sheena gives him a victory charm, saying she went by herself to find and buy one to his surprise. And then he departs. At the presentation though, Kanda's nervous but recognizes Kazuki Fujisawa, a programmer he admires, who asks what does he think he needs to do to become a creator. But Kanda's mind goes blank. Later, Kanda heads back, thinking on how the presentation was a failure and he was rejected. So he's now to home, which Aoyama notices, but Sheena approaches him. He asks about her meeting, and she says she'll be serialized. But Kanda tells her to go draw while thinking, please go. Later, Aoyama explains what happened to Jin and Misaki, but seeing Aoyama sad, they decide to throw a welcoming party for her. Though meanwhile, Kanda throws his presentation material away, but is attacked by Misaki and her treasure because she wants to have a pool party. But Aoyama, knowing Kanda's sad, won't go. But Kanda realizes this and decides to go. So they go to the school's pool as Chihiro approved Jin to use it, though Aoyama's embarrassed of using a as it's her first time, but Kanda says it looks good. Sheena then shows hers but gets mad as Kanda didn't compliment hers as well, but he says it looks good too, making her smile. Though she then leaves, but this reminds Kanda of yesterday, making him sad. But then Misaki hits him with a kickboard, but he laughs and jumps at her. So the others jump in and they have fun in the pool. Afterwards they eat pot but are seen by a guard as Jin didn't actually get permission, so they run and hide while Kanda's sandwiched between Sheena and Aoyama. Afterwards they escape, but fireworks are then set off as Sheena runs and jumps because the guard's still after them. So they run away while laughing as Kanda says he's starting to have fun, telling Aoyama that he's figured out that the only way to get rid of his frustration is to try, even if he fails, as they all then race each other to Sakura Hall. There, they play with fireworks as Aoyama tells Sheena that she thinks she understands a little about love. Kanda wakes up but sees that Misaki and Sheena are painting his walls of Neapolitan, Misaki's Anon character. Afterwards, they've returned to school, but Aoyama and Kanda hear rumors of her being with Kanda since she moved to Sakura Hall. But then, Miyahara shouts to leave Aoyama alone, but nervous also includes Kanda because he's his friend. But this makes everyone call them. Later, in Sakura Hall, they have dinner, but someone rings the doorbell. But Kanda finds a beautiful blonde girl, a foreigner, who Sheena recognizes as Rita as she hugs her. The others see this and Chihiro explains she's Rita Ainsworth, Sheena's roommate from England. But she's there to take Sheena back to England, to everyone's surprise. Later, she explains she can't allow Sheena to waste her talent on manga, but Sheena won't go, so she kicks Rita out. But Kanda can't let Rita stay outside, despite not wanting Sheena to go at England, so he goes after her. But sees her outside, who figured he'd come, since a kind boy always goes save the damsel in distress. She's then let in, but takes a bath first, but she doesn't have other clothes since she didn't expect to stay in Japan, so Kanda gives her Sheena's pajamas. She figures he's on Mashiro duty, and explains she also did that in England. She recognizes Sheena's wall painting and says she's been with her since they were 6 at her grandfather's studio, but that she doesn't draw anymore. But she now wants to sleep in Kanda's room, but with him there to talk about Sheena. Kanda asks if Sheena's that amazing, so Rita says she's overwhelming, but that it makes her wish she'd disappear, and that if he stays by Sheena's side, he'll be destroyed too. At night, Kanda sleeps on the floor, thinking on Sheena's talent. But later, he wakes up with Rita on top of him, and Aoyama sees this, and Sheena, and everyone. But then, pissed at the noise, Ryunosuke comes out of his room, but introduces himself as it's the first time some of them see his face. And he's gone to school but uses his laptop and eats tomatoes while in class, since he's only there to increase his attendance scores. Though there, Aoyama asks Kanda about Rita, asking if he wants Sheena to return to England. Later at noon, he figures Sheena's the one who'll decide that, but Sheena has begun calling him an idiot repeatedly. Afterwards, he waits for her after art class, but she's ignoring him. So through text, he explains he wondered what was best for her now, but that he's keen to see her manga. But Sheena's replying, slowly sending you, saying she meant Sorata is an idiot, frustrating Kanda, but she smiles. Later, back home, Misaki wants them all to do something for the cultural festival, so they all agree to it, planning to make a game with Ryunosuke's talents, as Kanda says to make it interactive with the audience and Sheena to make it about Neapolitan, and they make Kanda the director, though he's left dumbfounded by this. After that, Kanda makes sketches, but Sheena comes and tells Rita to sleep in her room instead. She accepts, but with one condition, a date with Kanda this Sunday, to their shock. And that day, they go to a hotel, followed by Sheena and Aoyama. But Rita knew they'd come, so they go together to the European Young Artist exhibition the hotel hosts, where Sheena stares at a painting, but Rita shows Kanda and Aoyama a painting that completely captures them, the last painting Sheena did before leaving to Japan, and this makes Kanda think that Sheena should return to painting. Kanda's frustrated because his storyboards for Neapolitan are rough, so Rita draws Neapolitan for him, which he finds great, but she stops herself, though she claims nothing's wrong. Though Rita claims he must have it rough, as working with people whose talent is incredible must be quite a burden. But then, she asks if he's decided if Sheena should return to England, but he says she won't listen to him. But Rita figures he'd be more effective in persuading her. Though then, Kanda asks what she meant by Sheena destroying him, and if it had something to do with why Rita stopped painting. But Sheena then arrives and hands Kanda illustrations, which he compliments, while Rita watches. The following ways, they prepare for the game, but Rita notices Kanda's frustrated. But Ryunosuke sees her and tells her that Kanda still has that which she's forgotten, knowing she's given up on art. Afterwards, at school, they eat lunch, but Jin tells them they've got to make a presentation to the festival committee if they want to participate, presented by the director Kanda. And Ryunosuke then reports they're behind on schedule, with Kanda blaming himself as he's late with his storyboards. After eating, they run into the student council president, Soichiro Tatebayashi, and his girlfriend Saori Haimiya, who's providing music for their game. But he's the one who asked for their presentation, though Jin finds it weird they're the only group having to do one, as we see Soichiro hates Jin and they leave afterwards. Later they head home, but Kanda decides they have to bring someone else to the team with talent similar to Sheena's, and she suggested be Rita. Though Kanda says she gave up on art, Sheena says she wouldn't because she loves art, and Ryunosuke looks her up, seeing she's a professional artist already, but Sheena's surprised they didn't see her paintings at the exhibition. Though they see Rita arrive, so Sheena asks her to draw Neapolitan with her, but she declines, saying she's not as good as her. But Sheena says she's a great artist, but Rita, pissed, says it's her fault she gave up on art, saying everyone who studied with her at her grandfather's studio grew up to hate art because of her, because they couldn't measure to her, and she was oblivious to all this. So she helped her become a manga artist, figuring she deserved that boring life, and ruin her reputation, but got pissed seeing her. But that, she wants her to become the world's best painter, so she can brag that she studied with Sheena once, wanting to be part of her. But Ryunosuke tells her to bug off, calling her a coward and calling out her fake smiles. But Rita says art was her world, having studied with her for 10 years, but her grandfather told her to stop trying since she'd never outdo Sheena and blames her for existing. But Ryunosuke then asks, where was her will in that story? But Rita runs away at this, so they follow her besides Ryunosuke. They try to find her, but Kanda sees Sheena crying, saying that Rita hates her, but that she didn't understand what she said. So Kanda asks if she's ever invited someone, but she doesn't know. They then find her, and Kanda talks to her about how he thought Sheena was alone. But that she reached Sheena, and that even though she doesn't understand many things, he's sure she's very important to her, finding amazing how she stood by her side so long, admiring her resilience, saying he wants to be like her. Rita smiles, but admits Ryunosuke was right, since she's forgotten what she wants to do. As Kanda says that, making things with talented people is difficult, but that it's exciting to watch the experience. Sheena then approaches her and says she didn't know what she was thinking, but that she still doesn't know. But that she didn't notice anything all this time because she had so much fun drawing next to her, as she didn't feel alone when she was with her. But Rita hugs her, saying she also had fun, loving painting with her, but thought she never noticed her, fearing she didn't consider her a friend, and says she wants to keep making art and apologizes to Sheena. Afterwards, Rita joined the group's project and Kanda presented Neapolitan to the board, getting applauded. They then celebrated and Rita apologized to Ryunosuke, though he got nervous and ran away. Though she then tells Kanda she still wants Sheena to paint again, but she'll behave herself until after the festival, wanting to see Neapolitan with them, saying she loves art and thanking them. The school festival's begun, and Kanda works there, though exhausted because of Neapolitan, but Aoyama arrives and takes over for him. So he goes do more work on Neapolitan with Jin, having few days left. Misaki then comes and seeing Kanda tired, takes them to the art exhibit, where Sheen is using a cat costume, and see the exhibitions of Forest Cafe, where Misaki's a waiter in a bear costume, though she gets jealous as Jin flirts with a waiter, and Sheena draws Kanda's literal portrait with ketchup. After eating, they head back, but Kanda wants her to take the costume off, but she's only wearing. Meanwhile, Rita's in Ryunosuke's room because she's interested in him, though he tells her to go away, as she's accentuating her. As Mei-chan also gets mad at her. Meanwhile, the others arrive, and they work on the game, while Aoyama decides to make dinner, but she thinks on how Kanda was helping Sheena and accidentally makes sauce fall on her tracksuit, so she goes clean it, but there, spots a weight scale. Later, Kanda goes wash his face, but didn't notice that Aoyama's, so he's kicked out. But then, he hears Rita talking through the phone, saying that the flight departs after the festival and that Sheena understands. But she heard Kanda there and explains it was Sheena's father in England, saying that Sheena will return where she belongs, leaving him shocked. The next day at the festival, Kanda asks Sheena if there's something she wants to say, but is interrupted by someone who wants her help, so he heads to the prep room, but sees Ryunosuke in a maid dress because Aoyama promised he could just stand there if he wore it, as he says he attended because Rita's taken over her room. Ryunosuke then shows him the game's climax, where the audience has to clap to give Neapolitan strength to finish the boss, but Kanda seeks something more from the system. Though Ryunosuke shows him Kazuki Fujisawa's having a lecture there. Kanda attends and hears him say that to create a product that appeals to the user's emotions, one must first move their own heart. After the lecture, Kanda ponders on it, but all he can think on right now is Sheena, who's next to him as Ryunosuke sent her for him. But she says Jin and Misaki are having a moment, but it's not Misaki, but rather her older sister Fuka, as Jin remembers how she told her that she figured she was just a substitute to Misaki, afraid of hurting her, wanting to keep her by his side forever. Kanda and Sheena arrive but see Misaki peeking, as Fuka asks Jin for another, but he rejects her and she says it was just a joke, but she then mentions how he's leaving to Osaka. Misaki then runs away, so Kanda tries to console her. But she's not sad, she's relieved because she thought Jin hadn't gotten over Fuka, but knowing he has, she decides to make Neapolitan Jin and everyone's favorite memory and won't give up on him. And Sheena then tells Kanda they've got to make Neapolitan memorable as she falls asleep. Later in the prep room, Kanda thinks on making the best memory with Neapolitan, but wonders if it's okay if all they do is make memories, and if it's okay for him to let Sheena go back to England. But then, he remembers Fujisawa's words and Sheena's emotions from her manga, and comes up with that he wants to add the power of love to Neapolitan's final attack, making the audience shout what they feel during it, which will make Neapolitan win. They all agree to it and eventually finish working on Neapolitan, completely exhausted, so they go sleep. Though, Kanda then thinks on how Sheena will leave, but he gets a text from her saying she wants to see him, and he finds her outside, as she says she wants to stay with him until she falls asleep. Kanda has given her bed to Sheena, but she wants to sleep next to him. She though asks if she also hurt him like he did to Rita, as Kanda thinks on how he got comparing himself to Sheena, but that, thanks to that, he confronted his own feelings, and thinks on Sheena returning to England. So he wants to respond, but Sheena fell asleep. Afterwards, the team arrives at the festival, noticing many people are there just for their show, thanks to the talent working on it. Meanwhile, Chihiro's in the theater but sees glow sticks, being told they're controls by Fujisawa, who Chihiro's surprised to see, as he says he's there to see the fruits of the students' labor of his old dorm, Sakura Hall. Meanwhile, the group's ready to present Neapolitan and form a round where Kanda tells them to enjoy themselves for the next 30 minutes, which they agree to do. After that, the show begins, presenting Milky Way Cat, Neapolitan, a piloted mecha cat fighting an alien army, with Aoyama as the audience's guide, showing they have to control Neapolitan with their glow sticks, having to clap and raise their hands while using them. And it works as the audience cheers and the group watches. The presentation goes smoothly, and then they're at the end where the villains almost depleted Neapolitan's energy bar. So Aoyama asks the audience to share their love with Neapolitan, telling them to shout their passion, but the audience has doubts of doing that. As Kanda blames himself, while thinking he wanted to make memories with everyone. But then, Sheena stands up and shouts thank you for everything. So Misaki follows, yelling Jin to look at her instead of Fuka, and Rita, yelling for Ryunosuke's email address. And the audience finds this fun, so they follow, telling Neapolitan to fight and many things like declaring their love or their bottled feelings, and they all erupt in emotion, filling Neapolitan's bar up. As Kanda tells Sheena that there's a lot more he wants to tell her, and then yells that he'd be the one thanking her. And Neapolitan's bar fills up, and the audience launches the attack, beating the villain, saving Earth, and finishing the show as the audience erupts in cheers, and the group comes out to greet the audience while holding each other's hands as Kanda thinks that he'll never forget this day. After the festival, Jin's with Misaki but talks about what she shouted, explaining Fuka's just his ex-girlfriend now, and that's that, and gives Misaki the necklace from the other day at last. But then they spot Rita and Sheena taking a taxi. Meanwhile, Aoyama tells Kanda he can't find Rita nor Sheena, and he remembers Rita's call, but Kanda won't stop her since it's her decision, and that he already said what he wanted. But Aoyama's indignated, since that must not be all, confronting him. So he reveals he actually wants to stop her, wondering how she can throw the 6 months they spent together away like that. Aoyama realizes that's what he wanted to tell, so she says to tell her, and leaves to try find Sheena in the school. Though in a classroom she finds Miyahara, who asks if she heard what he shouted, but she didn't, so he reveals that he loves her. But Aoyama just apologizes and runs from there. But then, Misaki barges in with her car into the school, saying that Sheena and Rita left already to the airport, so they hop in and head there. And after arriving, Kanda spots them and rushes and hugs Sheena, begging her not to go, but she's not going anywhere since she only went to see Riga off, to Kanda's shock. Rita asks them to look after Sheena, and Ryunosuke gives her Kanda's address to her dismay, so she tries to punish him with a hit, but he blocks it. And she then kisses him, and then she departs to England. Though later, while waving Rita's plane goodbye, Sheena claims that her has been feeling weird because of Kanda, wondering if this is love. Sheena wonders if what she feels is love, but she then talks about defeating Neapolitan's enemies and leaves, and is hit by Misaki, who's beamed up by Neapolitan because it was all a dream. Later, Kanda thinks on that dream, but Jin arrives and shows Neapolitan gathered very positive reviews. And Kanda says he's presented a new pitch for the game contest again, awaiting their answer. And that he ended up giving Ryunosuke's number to Rita, which pissed off Mai-chan. Aoyama then arrives with Sheena, because Sheena was looking for Kanda, but says that she doesn't need anything and sits next to Kanda, confusing them. And then Misaki arrives, but seeing Jin's asleep, she goes for a kiss, but he holds her head. Though then she gives him a bento that says I love you, which Sheena stares at, and Aoyama notices. After that, Kanda walks with Aoyama, who tells him that he doesn't understand Sheena. So Kanda says to tell what's up, but she won't and runs away. After that, Aoyama's with her friends, talking about Christmas, but they tell her she's got to declare to Kanda already. And at noon, Aoyama sees Jin's found a love letter that plays a marriage song containing a wedding registration with Misaki's info. Though then, he remembers he meant to give Aoyama 2 tickets for a play to go with someone, but it's on Christmas Eve, being told to make it count. Afterwards, Sheena's in Kanda's room, telling him that she wants to make lunch to his surprise. In the kitchen, Kanda doesn't want her to cook, but Jin helps with her apron and leaves to a date, leaving Kanda alone to his dismay. Seeing she's serious, he gives in and agrees to teach her. But after breaking eggs, she now tries using a knife, despite Kanda's refusal. But she ends up slightly herself, so Chihiro patches her up and hits Kanda. But Sheena now can't finish her cover for tomorrow. Kanda tells her to stop, but she asks if she doesn't want her to cook, but he doesn't want her injured, but she claims it's not that. But that she doesn't understand, though then leaves to call Ayano, confusing Kanda. Later, Ayano arrives, and afterwards, Kanda thinks on how, up until recently, it seemed like Sheena lived solely to draw manga. Ayano's then leaving, but he wants to talk, so she goes eat with him again. Ayano says her cut won't interfere with her work, but then she points out that Sheena's changed a little lately, saying that she used to have the face of an artist at first. Kanda says he felt the same, but that now, something feels off with her, which irritates him. Confused at her not just focusing on manga anymore, feeling like she isn't the real Sheena. But Ayano claims this is normal for a girl, but she's conflicted because it's important for Sheena to have normal experiences. But that, it causes her to lose her unique outlook on the world. But then, she asks which Sheena he likes, making him embarrassed. But he responds that he feels more at ease with the old Sheena. Later, he returns home but finds a letter from the game contest. But after opening it, he crushes it. But Sheena approaches him, who's cooking again, having finished her cover. But Kanda yells at her that she might injure herself and to focus on her manga, yelling that she used to work harder and that people who've been allowed to draw shouldn't slack off. But Sheena tells him that, in that case, he must get out from inside her. But she doesn't know what this feeling is, asking Kanda to tell her. But he's frustrated. Afterwards, he remembers he forgot to hand Sheena a party invitation Ayano gave him. Though then, Misaki arrives in a Santa despite Christmas being 1 month away and wants him to go to her room. Meanwhile, Aoyama ponders on inviting Kanda. Though at home, she finds him upstairs, so she goes with him into Misaki's room, where she asks for help in how to make Jin like her, saying he's ignored all her efforts. But her plan now is to have them leave the house empty on Christmas Eve, with just her and Jin, and then they leave the room. But at that, Aoyama asks to go to Kanda's room, where she asks him to go to a play with her on Christmas Eve, and he accepts, promising it. Misaki's almost gotten everyone to leave the 24th. Afterwards, Kanda, who hasn't even talked to Sheena since their fight, leaves her invitation on her door. But he then finds a bankuchin on his door from Sheena, who he gives it to. But he thinks this is a prank, making him angry, so he yells and she runs scared. The next day at school, Aoyama's friends tell her to confess to Kanda soon, since his relationship with Sheena is right now. Meanwhile, Jin's approached by Soichiro, who talks about the distance with Osaka and how he'll flirt with girls there, mentioning Misaki. But Jin says he won't, saying he's broken up with all his women already, and that Misaki's not alone now, having Sakurasou now. But Soichiro asks what he wants, so Jin says he knows Misaki loves him, but he wants to make her love him, because he really does love her. Meanwhile, Misaki helps Aoyama pick an outfit for the 24th, but Aoyama then asks if she isn't afraid of confessing, which she is, but she can't let herself fall in the same cycle of questions again. Meanwhile, Kanda finds another bankuchin outside his room, but Chihiro runs into him, who talks about Sheena, saying she doesn't know how to face something she's never felt before, like reconciling. Kanda figures she wants him to apologize, but Chihiro calls him an idiot, saying that the world isn't black nor white. Rather, it's gray, and not to accept only his own ideal scenario, otherwise he'll make everyone unhappy, and to do something about Sheena because he's a man. And that she's locking up Sakurasou at the end of the year since she's going to Australia, so they'll have to go home momentarily. The 23rd, Kanda found another bankuchin, and Jin starred at a ring. And then, the 24th arrived, so Ryunosuke wrote someone a Christmas letter. Afterwards, Kanda has to take Sheena to her party, but sees he got a letter, but saves it instead. On the way, he thinks on Chihiro's words, but can't bring himself to talk. But Sheena mentions the letter, as he says they're his audition's results, but that he'll look later. After that, Kanda drops Sheena with Ayano, but she stops him, telling him to talk to her. But he clutches his letter and tells Ayano everything's fine, leaving afterwards. But Sheena's left sad. Later, Aoyama finds Kanda, so they go see the play. Meanwhile, Rita tries to talk to Ryunosuke, but Mei-chan won't let her. And meanwhile, Sheena writes on a window Sora. Afterwards, Kanda and Aoyama exit the play and share an umbrella. They talk about how Aoyama works hard, but then she mentions an audition she'll have in February, revealing that her parents told her to go back to Osaka if she fails at it, to Kanda's shock. But asking if Kanda will be sad if she leaves, he says he knows she'll pass. But Aoyama tells him that if she passes her audition, to hear what she has to say. But then, Kanda gets called by Ayano, saying that Sheena's disappeared, shocking Kanda, who rushes to find her, but his letter falls off. In Sakurasou, Misaki's plan worked, showing herself to Jin. So Jin, who's holding a ring, tells her he's always loved her. Kanda, meanwhile, has found Sheena. She was searching for him to give him a... Kanda's angry, but she explains she wanted to talk to him, but saw him unhappy and thought of making him happy, but she doesn't know. And the is all she can do. So Kanda covers her and eats it, and despite being mad, he hugs her. He was afraid of her getting hurt, as Sheena says she thinks on him a lot, which is why she wanted to make lunch for him. But she doesn't understand this new feeling. Kanda then praises her drawing skills, saying her manga drawings shocked him, having liked that about her since then, asking her not to let him down. But Aoyama's there, who then interrupts and hands Kanda his letter, which he opens, and then asks Aoyama for help preparing his presentation again. And Sheena says she'll help too. Afterwards, they returned home, but found Misaki on the floor, remembering that Jin told her he can't treat her right now, but to be the girl he loves, not understanding him as she cries. Sakura Hall's closing momentarily, but Sheena hasn't called Rita. Aoyama forgot about this, and Misaki won't go home since her hometown reminds her of Jin, so Chihiro decides they'll stay at Kanda's place since she's leaving this afternoon. So they head there with one of their cats as the others got caretakers. Though on the way, Kanda's not happy as they ate all the bamboo shots. And later, they arrive, but Yuko's not happy at this. They're then greeted by Kanda's mom and his very stoic dad. Afterwards, Kanda calls Jin, asking what happened the 24th. Jin says he confessed to Misaki, but he asked for more time because since he's going to college and because he's in love with Misaki, he can't become a worthless man without goals. And he's staying with Soichiro for now, despite him hating him. Afterwards, after dinner, Kanda's mom mentions how their dad doesn't want Yuko to take the Sume entrance exam, and Kanda won't help convince him. But Aoyama offers Yuko to study together, saying her dad might change his mind if he sees her studying. But meanwhile, Misaki stares at a script and remembers Jin handing her one. She reacted oddly at first, but then got happy, but they were left dissatisfied. Though Sheena's seeing she's sad. Later, Mei-chan helps Kanda with his presentation, though then Yuko wants him to help her study since Aoyama's shopping with her mom. But she's brought a magazine with a manga she loves, Nanohana Hall, written by Mashiro Sheena, but she sees Sheena's her, so she asked for her autograph. Aoyama, though, then arrives and takes Yuko to study while she says she's cheering on Sheena. After that, Kanda asks Sheena if she'll met her deadline, but she says she presented it already. But she then asks if this is what he liked about her, and he says it is. Sheena then shows him a drawing she made for his presentation, but asks if he'll stop liking her if she draws things that aren't manga, but he claims he won't, which makes her happy. Afterwards, he does his mock presentation, and he's cheered on, though his father yawns. Later, Aoyama helps Kanda with his presentation, thanking her for always helping him. Aoyama then mentions her audition script, which will arrive soon, asking Kanda to help her practice as Kanda says he'll help in any way he can, making her blush. But the truth is, he wants her to prove hard work is always reward, telling each other to work hard. And they lock eyes. But Sheena interrupts then, saying she wants to work hard as well. Though they know she already works hard, Sheena says there have been things she doesn't understand lately as she leaves, confusing them. After that, she tells the same thing to Misaki and asks how does she wants things to go with Jin, since in her manga they're together. She claims to want to be with Jin, but that if making animations would hurt him, he'd stop. But Sheena asks if Jin would like if she did that, asking what does Jin like about her. Later, Kanda's mom shows Aoyama and Kanda that Yuko fell asleep studying hard, so Kanda decides to talk with her dad. But later, while taking a bath, his dad barges in to his shock and gets in the bath, saying he knows Kanda wants to talk. So he tells him to allow Yuko to apply the sume. He says it might be impossible for Yuko to get into sume, but he'll allow it. Though, he now can't move as the water's too and he before talking to him. Afterwards, they all go see the sunrise as their New Year's celebration, though Misaki wonders what does Jin love about her. They then arrive and Yuko thanks Kanda for talking to their dad. And Misaki thanks Sheena, saying that she loves animating and wants to do that. And that was what Jin liked about her, as she yells she'll make Jin look at her now. And Kanda yells that his presentation will be a success. And Aoyama that she'll pass her audition. And Yuko that she'll get into sume. And Sheena just shouts Naipalin's meatball beam attack, while Misaki hopes that Jin gets accepted. And 3 days later, they headed back while Kanda was looking towards facing his presentation. Kanda's prepared for his presentation tomorrow. Meanwhile, Aoyama sees Misaki's happy again and shows her Jin's script, which Aoyama asks to borrow, wanting to use it for her audition on February 14th, which she happily accepts. In the morning, Kanda gets awakened by Yuko's call, who says she'll be staying at Sakura Hall the 12th for her exam. Afterwards, during breakfast, Chihiro sees Kanda's nervous, so he's told not to try so hard. Afterwards, they return to school, but Misaki's spying on Jin, which Kanda notices, so he goes talk with him. He asks if he'll return to Sakura Hall, but Jin says he'll be staying at Soichiro's place until after the exams. Haimimiya then arrives, and Jin says he wishes he could have experienced a love like theirs, though then leaves. Later, Misaki tells Kanda that she'll move forward, so he has to give his best as well. And later, he heads to the interview, receiving a text from Aoyama telling him he can do it. And afterwards, his presentation's begun, but he nervously bumps his head against the microphone, making Fujisawa laugh. But Kanda remembers Chihiro's words, and from now on, the presentation goes smoothly, presenting a battle game with music-based combat. Though while he's talking, an executive asks Fujisawa about the cost of making this game. Afterwards, Kanda finishes, but he's told it'll be difficult to release his game. But that, it'd like to polish it, saying he's partially passed, telling him to email them as Fujisawa gives him his card. After leaving, he texts the group that he succeeded, and later they celebrate. Kanda thanks Aoyama for her text, saying it motivated him. But Sheena, hearing this, goes and sends him a text containing "You can do it," though Kanda thinks this is a prank. But Sheena gets mad because he reacted nicely to Aoyama. But then, he thanks her for her illustration, saying it helped a lot. She's glad, but she looks at Aoyama, but claims it's nothing. Later, Aoyama and Kanda wash the dishes, but then she asks for a favor. And then, at the table, she says there's something she's always wanted to tell him. That she's always loved him. And Kanda, stuttering, says he feels the same. But they're just reading his script, though Sheena's watching. The next day, Sheena meets with Ayano, but tells her that seeing Kanda and Aoyama together makes her feel gloomy and weird in the. So Ayano tells her to read romance mangas and pour her gloom into her manga. Meanwhile, Aoyama's told by her friends to use the script as an excuse to confess to Kanda, and later, while practicing with him, she remembers this and becomes too embarrassed to talk. At 3 a.m., Misaki's struggling over work, so she goes to the kitchen and finds Sheena there. So they rest, while Sheena reads a manga where a girl confesses to a man with a gift. In the afternoon, Kanda meets up with Fujisawa regarding his game, but he's curious who drew his presentation's illustration, so Kanda says it was someone from Sakurasou. Fujisawa realizes Kanda's a student of Chihiro, revealing they were classmates and that he went to see Neapolitan praising it. Meanwhile, Yuko arrives at Sakurasou. They later eat dinner, while Misaki and Yuko are excited for Valentine's Day, as Misaki's going to do something with chocolate. Aoyama then arrives, welcoming Yuko, and later, she practices her script, while looking at chocolate, but she saves it. Meanwhile, Yuko sleeps in Kanda's room, but Sheena gets in a to Yuko's shock, wanting him to dry his hair, so he does, but Yuko hates it. The next day, Yuko leaves to her exam, but first gives Kanda homemade chocolate, but then whispers to him, asking who he likes more between Aoyama and Sheena, to his embarrassment as she leaves, and the girls notice he's blushing. It's now the 14th, and Kanda sees Aoyama leaving to her audition. Meanwhile, Ayano calls Sheena, asking her to make a cover in a rush since the other artist's ill, which she accepts. Kanda then calls Sheena to get dressed, but she already is, to his surprise, besides missing a sock she couldn't find, but she won't let him check his bag, saying she's got everything important. But then, they see Rita's there to their surprise. She explains she took time off to come because it's Valentine's Day and her challenge is Ryunosuke. Afterwards, at school, Kanda spots Aoyama, who explains she can still make her audition after school. But then, Aoyama mentions their promise, but are interrupted by Miyahara, who encourages Aoyama for her audition and leaves. Later, Kanda receives a text from Sheena telling him to meet up on the roof after school, but he wonders if she'll give him a chocolate. Meanwhile, Rita waits for Ryunosuke, but he's locked in the bathroom. But she's determined to give him her chocolate. She then recalls his Christmas email, but he says it was just a meaningless New Year's card, disappointing Rita. Meanwhile, after class, Aoyama heads to her audition, but Kanda's on cleaning duty, so he goes take out trash, though then spots Misaki with Haimimiya, who awaits gin with chocolate as Soichiro promised to bring him. Afterwards, Kanda rushes to Sheena, but Aoyama calls him, desperately saying her train malfunctioned at the station, so she won't make her audition. But Kanda decides to go for her, but first calls Sheena, but she won't answer, so leaves a voicemail explaining this. But he either runs into Miyahara and asks for his bike, explaining what happened. But Miyahara tells him to hop on, so they go after her. Though he's then struggling on a slope, but he tries to impulse himself with the power of love. But he can't anymore and tells Kanda to go on his own. But Kanda asks what he meant by power of love, so Miyahara corrects it with the power of a loser's love, explaining Nanami rejected him to Kanda's shock, but he sends him off. Later, he arrives to Aoyama, but all the taxis are busy, so they decide to rush on the bike. Meanwhile, Ryunosuke sees that Rita's gone, but she left him her chocolate and a note saying she had to go and that she didn't really have time to come, but she wanted to see him at least today, and that their kiss was her first. And meanwhile, Jin didn't arrive, but Misaki's fine with that. Meanwhile, Aoyama recalls how Kanda already helped her like this. But then, Kanda tells her to practice on the way, so she does, saying that she's always. But then, she hugs Kanda, so he stops the bike. And Aoyama says, "I love you." Kanda's shocked, but Aoyama asks if it was believable, so he says she surprised him. And then, as she's close enough, she leaves, thanking him. Though Kanda then remembers Sheena's waiting for him. So Kanda rushes, forcing himself past exhaustion to the roof, and finds Sheena, who gives him bamboo shoots, saying Valentine's Day is chocolate day and wanted to do it normally on the roof per Ayano's manga. She says she's not normal, and that's why she hasn't understood him recently, and that he's so far away, saying he went to Aoyama's side today. Though Kanda says it was an important day for her, but Sheena says it was for her as well, and she's disappointed he didn't tell her to work hard together. But at this, Kanda realizes while he couldn't see Sheena, being leads above him, she never saw him as less ever. So Kanda says he was also looking forward to this, and that the chocolate made him happy, which makes Sheena happy, making him blush. But he then says to go home, but Sheena wants to hold his hand, which he accepts, but she lets go because it makes her heart pound. As Kanda thinks on how she's always been so far away, but now. So he holds her hand and tells her her heart's pounding because she's alive. But she asks, what about him? So he tells her he feels more alive than her. Later, they return home and find Aoyama back from her audition waiting for the results. Though Sheena asked about Rita, so Ryunosuke says she went home to their shock, but he won't say why. Though Misaki's sure she'll be back soon, but Kanda wonders if Misaki gave Jin her chocolate, and then remembers Aoyama's promise, but he wonders if it's that she loves him, to his shock. Misaki gets called by Jin, but she won't answer. So Jin wonders what to do, staring at a ring box. The next day, Kanda meets up with Fujisawa for his game, but Fujisawa then asks him if the girl who drew his illustration could draw more for them. Though he looks unhappy, he says he'll tell Sheena. Later, he returns home but sees Chihiro leaving, who's uncharacteristically serious. Aoyama then spots him and accompanies him to see Yuko's test results, but Sheena also tagged along. They then arrive, but see that Yuko's number didn't pass, calling and telling her that to her dismay. Then, Soichiro arrives with Haimimiya, who says that her younger brother, Yori, passed the exam. But then, she asks about Misaki because Jin came here but to tell his teacher that he passed Osaka's entry exam. Well, the graduation's in 2 weeks. So Aoyama goes get Misaki, while Kanda and Sheena go find Jin, and they do, so they have him go to the roof. But there, he says he can't date Misaki, but Kanda says he's not being himself and holds him by the neck, asking, what if Misaki hooked with someone else? But Jin hits him for this, and they then fight, while Jin says he couldn't take any more, not knowing if he'd get into college, and couldn't focus on anything because of Misaki, saying that it's not easy for him to confess his feelings to her, and that he needs to be prepared to spend his life with her. But Kanda then asked him to go out with Misaki, saying Aoyama will bring her here, but he claims she won't come. Meanwhile, Aoyama's arrived to Misaki and tells her to go, but she refuses, saying she has work. But Aoyama asks if she'll trap herself in a cycle again, but Misaki doesn't want to, saying that she was always with Jin and thought he'd always be by her side. But she didn't realize she liked him when younger, wondering that if she did, she wouldn't have fallen in that cycle. We then see that, one day, Misaki was doing a giant drawing, but Jin heard guys talking poorly of her, so he fought them. Though later, Fuka consoled him, but told him that she couldn't watch Misaki hurt him anymore. And afterwards, Jin dropped her home, but Misaki saw them holding hands. In the present, Jin says Misaki's avoiding her, while Misaki tells Aoyama she's afraid to see Jin of him saying something mean to her, and she thought she might be able to see him as she finished a script scene, but she doesn't want to finish it. On the roof, Sheena tells Jin Misaki will come, and Jin says he's really glad he came to Sumai High, as he remembers when Misaki's teacher handed her a Sumai High magazine, telling her that she might find more people like her there. And then he remembers telling Fuka he'd apply there as well, which led to their breakup as she realized she was just Misaki's substitute. But in the present, Aoyama's decided to bring Misaki to school, and later they arrive, but they block the door because teachers are there because of the fight. Though then, Jin tells Misaki he passed and will leave to Osaka, but tells her to do what she really wants, recalling how she had fun in Neapolitan, saying that his scripts aren't good enough, which she recognizes, but that in 4 years he'll come back and write scripts good enough for her, and puts a ring on her that'll keep him away. as she says she'll never take it off. Though the teachers have forced their way in, but Jin calms them and they're escorted out. But Jin locks them behind and says to go back home to Sakura Hall. And later, they've arrived, but they find Chihiro, who says that the Board of Trustees has decided to demolish Sakura Hall at the end of the year. Chihiro explains the building was inspected during winter break, as Kanda recalls that's when she went to Australia and declared it unsafe, though Jin finds this odd. Chihiro then leaves, but while Aoyama and Kanda protest, Jin tells them it'd be better if they returned to the regular dorms, as they'll have less to worry about. Afterwards, Kanda talks to Sheena about this, as she claims to understand that in April they'll move to the regular dorms, but that he'll still take care of her. But he explains he can't do that there, as the men can't enter the women's dorm, which she finds a problem. Though then, they spot a picture of when Kanda first moved in. He recalls that he moved there because of the principal, though wasn't happy, but he promised his friends he'd find an owner for the cat and return by the second semester. And at night, he'd arrived there and found it run down. And the door was open, but it was clean inside and his room was ready, but he saw a body in his locker, which then jumped at him thinking he's a burglar, but he recognizes her as Misaki Kamigusa, so he introduces himself, and she calms down seeing Hikari. And then he saw Chihiro, who was going to a mixer. And Jin then sees them and introduces himself but has to leave, whispering to Kanda he's dating a married girl, to his shock. After that, Misaki had Kanda play a game, beating him 98 times in a row. He then wants to take a bath, but Misaki goes do that as well, so Kanda's left frustrated. But he then hears a noise and sees a ghost, and then sees Chihiro with a face mask, scaring him, so she kicked him. But he explained what happened, and she says it was just Ryunosuke Akasaka, a recluse who hasn't attended school since enrolling. But Kanda says it's her responsibility to have him attend, but she won't, saying that making someone do something they don't want will just make their life unpleasant, which is why she doesn't do any work, and then gives him Ryunosuke's number if he wants to talk. So later he texts him, introducing himself, but is replied that he's busy by Maid-chan. And thinking Ryunosuke's playing a prank, he's explained she's her auto-reply AI program, asking how couldn't he figure that out, which pisses Kanda off. And Misaki then arrives, wanting him to see her play a single-player game for 3 hours. So Kanda leaves frustrated, but he then sees another stray cat, which he ends up adopting. Though Jin then comes back, saying his girlfriend didn't let him sleep, and follows Kanda, who's surprised by a confetti cannon by Misaki, who's throwing a welcome party for him at 6 in the morning. This being why Jin came back, as Kanda's surprised at seeing all this, while Jin explains Misaki always cleaned this room, so it'd be ready when someone moved in. And the next day, they took a picture of everyone, besides Ryunosuke. Back in the present, Kanda recalls his memories in Sakura Hall and doesn't want Sakura Hall to disappear, while Ryunosuke has decided to hack the server and find the real reason. And they all decide they'll stop Sakura Hall from being torn down. Sakura Hall's members being collecting signatures to prevent Sakura Hall from closing, but needing 2/3 of the entire school. But later, they've only gotten 3 signatures, but Ryunosuke then approaches them and shows them he's gotten the board meeting's contents, to their shock. Reading, they see the expert determine Sakura Hall to be torn down, but in 5 years. But then, see the entire topics are about Sheena, as Ryunosuke explains that the board feels Sakura Hall's influencing Sheena to do manga, and they see it as a fearing they'll be called out for squandering her talent. Kanda wants to talk to the principal about this, but can't, because it exposed Ryunosuke, and that Chihiro herself insisted in the meeting Sakura Hall wasn't why Sheena drew manga. So Ryunosuke implies that Sheena should leave, that way they won't harm Sakura Hall, and that Kanda's got to focus on his game as well, but he gets pissed. But Sheena is there, but appears to haven't heard anything. She shows she got 1 signature, but is told they'll need a lot more, so she goes at it again. Ryunosuke though points out the third years aren't on campus, making 1/3 of the students, so they won't even get close, and that the board might not even consider it as long as Sheena stays. But Kanda asks how can Sakura Hall be Sakura Hall if someone who belongs there is missing, not wanting his precious friends to leave. But Ryunosuke asks if they'd stop being friends if it was torn down, and that half the residents will leave soon anyways, including Aoyama, since if she passes her audition, she'll get hired, get money, and leave Sakura Hall. So he recommends just spending time with their friends than wasting it collecting signatures. Later, Aoyama ponders on that, but still decides to get signatures, though they talk about how she'll graduate soon from her training school after 2 years, pass or fail. Meanwhile, Rita emails Ryunosuke as Sheena told her what's happening, but Mei-chan won't let her see him. but she asks why Ryunosuke isn't helping and pleads Mei-chan to tell her because if Sakurahall disappears, he'll become even more alone. But then Mei-chan claims there's a bug and a photo is dipslayed of Ryunosuke with old friends. She explains that in middle school, Ryunosuke decided to make a game with his friends, but he was too smart and criticized them harshly, so they ostracized him. Meanwhile, Shina stares at a huge canvas. While that happens, Kanda meets with Fujisawa, but he only thinks on his friends. Fujisawa notices this, so they take a break, and Kanda explains what's happening. So Fujisawa tells him that if he can't give up one thing, there must be a way to manage both without choosing. But that he chooses as long as he considers what he wants, needs, and should do. At night, he now awaits the 7 for his game's meeting's results, but spots Aoyama there, so they head back as she says today was her last day of training school. She recalls her teacher complimented her years ago when reading aloud, and that's when her passion started. They then find Shina outside, who's looking at Sakurahall and has found a letter for Aoyama. Her audition results. So she reads it and smiling says she failed. Kanda's shocked, but she claims to be Ak, wanting to focus on getting signatures now and wanting to send Jin and Misaki off with a smile. And Misaki comes out in a bear costume, planning to get signatures that way. And next day she tries, but scares everyone off as Aoyama chases her and makes her a costume as well while the others watch. But Kanda's worried for Aoyama, but Jin figures she's trying her hardest to be strong for Sakurahall's sake. Meanwhile, Ryunosuke gets called by Rita, and Mei-chan recommends picking up, so he does. She tells him he knows about his painful experience, but that, like she didn't stop with art, he shouldn't stop because of it. The next day, Aoyama recollects signatures, but is told they've already signed in the PC lab. As they see Ryunosuke set up a website asking for signatures for Sakurahall and has gotten many signatures, so they go thank him. Later, Kanda counts they've gotten 300 signatures, telling Shina this, but they need more. So Shina says she likes Sakurahall and that she'll protect it. The Sakurahall members spent time together, planning and collecting signatures, and even Shina had gotten her own cover. But Kanda knew everyone knew there was only a few more days they could spend together. At school, they weren't getting more signatures, and later, Shina painted on her canvas. While on a test, Kanda worries about the signatures and on his game because today's the 7th, but Aoyama suddenly begins crying, so Kanda takes her to the nurse's office. There she says she's okay and send him back to class. But then, he gets called by Fujisawa with the meeting results. But they didn't make it. Kanda's speechless, but Fujisawa explains someone submitted a second music game, a simpler one, but that it passed the screening first, and they don't need 2 music games. Kanda thanks him for his help, but Fujisawa regrets his future is determined by external forces, and that no matter how hard he works, there are things he can't change, which isn't fair. He then hangs up, but Kanda throws his phone to the floor and feels beaten. Ryunosuke then, through text, asks how's Aoyama, so Kanda says she's fine and left her alone. But Ryunosuke then asks if he's an idiot because someone who's fine wouldn't cry like that. Kanda knows he's right and goes find her, but she's gone, but then sees her standing outside under the rain. So he rushes at her, but she's emotionless. So Kanda tells her he's glad she cared about Sakurahall, but she doesn't have to herself like this. But Aoyama claims it's not that. She was afraid of the last 2 years being a waste, so she prepared excuses to pretend she's not hurting. But Kanda tells that, thanks to that, he was able to go on collecting signatures, so she's told she doesn't have to try so hard anymore, but she claims she has. But Kanda stops her and says she can't run from her audition's results anymore, and that he'll listen to everything she says, making her break down, regretting having sacrificed so much these 2 years for nothing, asking why wasn't she good enough. But Kanda hugs her and tells her she worked harder than anyone, and she cries. But Shina's been watching this. Afterwards, Kanda dries Aoyama up, and Chihiro then arrives and sees she has a slight fever, but today's the last day to gather signatures, but she has her rest for now. And after she leaves, she asks Kanda to stay with her until she falls asleep, and he accepts. But she wants to talk to avoid thinking, so he reveals his game failed to her shock, and that he needs courage to try again, as she claims the same, but he tells her to rest after working so hard. And Kanda falls asleep as well. But he then wakes up at night and rushes outside, finding his friends gathered 53 signatures, but they're not enough. So Kanda says he didn't do all he can and asks why did they wake him up, but he's told they couldn't let Aoyama sleep alone. So they go get Aoyama, but leave Shina with Kanda. She asks how many more they need, so he says a lot, and she claims she'll get them. But Kanda tells her it's over, while Misaki tells Aoyama the same. But Shina says he's lying, yelling that Sakura Hall will be torn down and they don't have enough. They then return home, but Kanda finds a letter from Fujisawa's company, but they're asking for Shina to work for them as the letters to her. Kanda gets frustrated and says the world isn't fair and that the hard work of ordinary people's never rewarded, saying that there was nothing they could do about Sakura Hall as well. But Shina says it's because of her, to Kanda's shock as she enters alone. And the next day, Shina, with a suitcase, leaves Sakura Hall. Shina is now at her school, finishing her painting. Meanwhile, Kanda recalls he felt like his heart ripped in two after seeing Shina's mail, and that he felt the only thing he could do to protect himself was taking his pain out on someone else, thinking that he didn't mean to say those things, but that maybe that's who he is. Afterwards, he sees Misaki's excited because the graduation ceremony's today, which he forgot. Jin tells him to go wake Shina up, so he goes, but they notice Kanda's feeling down, which is why they got to keep it together. Though then, Kanda won't knock, but sees Aoyama, who says she wishes he could forget yesterday, but Kanda wishes he could relive it, but then says to forget that. He then enters Shina's room, but can't find her anywhere, as Chihiro tells them Shina left, while they wonder if she knew she was the reason of all this. Chihiro recalls asking if Shina talked to Kanda, but she didn't and left, while dropping her letter. Kanda blames himself, but Ryunosuke's tracked her at the school, so they go find her in the art room. But only her phone's there, and they see her painting of everyone in Sakura Hall, but she didn't draw herself, and remembered her, saying she protects Sakura Hall. As Jin figures she planned to leave if they didn't get enough signatures to protect it. Kanda's pissed, but they're decided to find her, figuring she didn't return to England on her own, but that she might take a train, so Aoyama and Kanda go search the station. Outside, Aoyama decides to split up, but after letting Kanda go, she stops him and reminds him of their promise. So she tells him that she's always been grateful she's got to meet him, and that he gave her strength all this time, thanking him for this, and that this is why he tells Shina how he feels. So Kanda thanks her and runs off, while Aoyama whispers that the reason she's given him strength is because she's in love with him. Meanwhile, Ryunosuke's tired of looking for her, so he asks Rita through email instead, but she's behind him, surprising him, and claims Shina's fine since she doesn't give up so easily. Meanwhile, Chihiro finds Fujisawa outside Sakura Hall, so she slaps him for what happened, but he came to apologize, not knowing another teen wanted Shina. But hearing Sakura Hall will be torn down, he wants to help, but Chihiro says they don't need it, because her students will do something about it themselves. While that happens, Jin hands Soichiro a love letter from him, and meanwhile, Kanda finds out from a shop owner that Shina went to the station, so he heads there, while thinking to himself that he pretended it was someone else's fault that nothing happened. But that, when he met Shina, he realized if you put your mind to it, you can change the color of the world in an instant. And then he arrives and finds her and goes to her. But seeing him, Shina says Sakura Hall will be destroyed if she stays, knowing it's her fault, and that he hates her. But Kanda yells her to listen, and then calms down, saying that what he said yesterday was how he felt. As Shina cries, continuing with that for a long time, he was jealous of her since she had everything he wanted. But that, because of her, he found his goal, and despite working hard and being disappointed, all of that made for the greatest of days, while Aoyama's found them and listens. But a train arrives, but Kanda yells her that if he hadn't met her, he never would have known these feelings, and that's why he loves her for teaching him all of these things. And that he loves her, saying he'd never hate her, begging her not to go, but she's not there. As she went to him and tells him she wants to stay with him and at Sakura Hall, but she doesn't want it torn down. And that because of her, Aoyama suffered so much after her audition. But Aoyama tells her she shouldn't feel responsible, but that she's happy she worried about her and hugs her, saying she won't just let her leave, making her cry. And then Kanda tells her she doesn't understand Sakura Hall, because the Sakura Hall he means isn't the building. Sakura Hall is Sakura Hall because they're all there. And Shina understands, saying they're all Sakura Hall, and that she'll always stay at Sakura Hall. Ryunosuke and Rita then arrive, telling him to head to school as the ceremony's starting. And on the way, Kanda tells Shina that he doesn't know what color he wants to be yet, but that today's in specific color, wanting the graduation ceremony to be the color of cherry blossoms. As she says, she loves that color. Jin awaits for Kanda and everyone, while Misaki teases him with her uniform so he actually feels it, to her surprise. But then they see they're giving out cherry blossoms pins, but that it was Sakura Hall's idea. while Rita tells her friends she made cherry blossoms pins for the entire school, hearing that they're important in Japan at departures, and that it was Ryunosuke's idea, having arranged it with the student council. Later, the ceremony's begun, and they just barely made it. Besides Ryunosuke, who ran out of breath, and Rita, who followed him. Kanda then listens to a speech, which reminds him of how he was well received at Sakura Hall. But as he hears they'll protect Sumi's spirit, Kanda thinks he couldn't protect Sakura Hall. But Shina holds their hands, saying today's the color of cherry blossoms. But then, Chihiro introduces the graduating student representative, Misaki Kamigusa, to the teacher's shock, as it was supposed to be Soichiro, but Jin arranged for this. Though, Misaki begins reading a normal script to their relief, saying she applied to Swim A in search of friends, and she found them. At Sakura Hall, saying she was kicked out of the regular dorms in her first week and moved into a lonely Sakura Hall, where she dreamed for all the rooms to be filled one day, and it happened. And talks about the parties they had, the time they sneaked into the school's pool, and the fireworks of that night, and the culture festival, with Neapolitan being Sakura Hall's greatest work. And that they still had rough times, but they made their relationships persist, and calls Chihiro her beloved teacher, telling Shina that she looks up to her, and Aoyama, thanking her for her voice acting on her work, and Ryunosuke, who she knows shields his heart, but that he's her friend, and she's happy if he feels the same way, and to continue to be friends with Rita. And Kanda, thanking him for always being by her side, apologizing for all the trouble. And then she thanks everyone, but telling her friends from Sakura Hall, "Thanks for staying with me until this day," and concludes with that today she graduates. But she continues saying Sakura Hall's in danger of being torn down, so she begs everyone to not let that happen. The principal tries to stop this, but Jin tells him he already presented the changes in a manuscript, which he didn't read, but he still demands her be taken down the stage. But then, Kanda grabs the mic and says they're the ones who are grateful, thanking her for creating a place he belonged to, but he stopped. Only for Aoyama to yell, thanking her for always taking her into action, and Shina tells them she loves Sakura Hall, and Miyahara cheers on them and on Sakura Hall, followed by everyone. As Kanda realizes they might have not gotten enough signatures, but it got through them. He then goes to Misaki and tells her he wishes they could have done more together, not wanting her to go, but Misaki encourages him to make next year better than this one with new friends. But they're then told to sit down, but they refuse as Ryunosuke tells them everyone's on her side. And Soichiro says that Sakura Hall was created to nurture talent regardless of society's framework, and that the bondness of their students has made him jealous. So seeing the entire study bodies there, Chihiro asks the principal if he supports or opposes repealing the decision to tear down Sakura Hall. So Misaki has everyone who supports Sakura Hall throw their cherry blossoms pins into the air, and they all do. Though afterwards, the Sakura Hall members have been sent outside for the rest of the ceremony, but they praise Jin for his plan, and Misaki and Kanda shout Sakura Hall won't be destroyed, but are told to not make noise, but they laugh it off. Though then, a song's played about being friends forever. So Misaki sings and they follow and then hold hands and run together. Kindness fixed Sakura Hall's board, while Aoyama heads to Osaka, but momentarily remembering how she told Kanda she didn't want to give up voice acting, so Chihiro told her to go convince her parents, and that her lonely act didn't make her an adult, which she recognized was true and decided to do it, while Chihiro also told her her last 2 years weren't a waste at all. Meanwhile, Misaki's rented a van and they all board it as Misaki, Jin, and Rita say goodbye to Chihiro, though Fujisawa then arrives, saying he figured he'd fill the hole in Chihiro's heart, so she wants to go for. Afterwards, the students head to the airport, and there they saw Rita off, while Rita tricked Ryunosuke, pulling him in and kissing him, and also kissed Maid-chan. And later, they saw Aoyama and Jin of, but to have Misaki's trust, Jin kissed her, and if that wasn't enough, he hands her her love letter, the marriage certificate with his signature, telling her to go submit it together when he returns. And afterwards, they saw off Misaki, who's going home. Though, Kanda then asks Ryunosuke about teaching him to make games, saying that since his presentation he feels a door has opened to a frightening huge world, but he has to move forward. Ryunosuke then leaves as well, having a work meeting. So Kanda's left with Shina, who notices cherry blossoms from where they first met. Though, Kanda sees her and says beautiful, though Shina agrees, saying this is beautiful. Meanwhile, Jin talks to Aoyama, saying she's made the right decision and that they're just getting started, so there's no need to give up. And not on Sorata as well, embarrassing her. Later, Kanda and Sheena return to Sakura Hall, but he sees the empty rooms and remembers Misaki's dream. Though he then hears noise upstairs and rushes, seeing Sheena fell off her chair, trying to hang her painting. But he notices she's added herself now. But then, Sheena recalls everyone was kissing today, so she wants to try too. To Kanda's shock, but blushing, he accepts but has her close her eyes. So he approaches her and his cat jumps on his face. So Sheena figures not now, saying it's interesting because there's something to look forward to. Though, she then kisses him on the cheek, as a reservation for the future. Time later, a scholar named Haze Kana says she'll be moving into Sakura Hall since she can't sleep in presence of others. So she goes to Chihiro, who recognizes Kana as the highest scoring freshman and introduces her to the also new member of Sakura Hall, Aoi Haimiya, who was exiled for peeing in the girls' bathroom. Later, Aoyama's returned from Osaka, while Kanda prepares dinner for the newcomers, and she says her parents accepted her decision, though she then notices Kanda's new pitch of a horror adventure game and decides to read some lines. Meanwhile, the newcomers arrive, but they hear a girl yelling that she wants and they see Kanda with a So Yora runs scared but runs into Ryunosuke with a scythe who was cutting grass. Afraid, he runs inside into a room and finds Sheena in her messy room. So he introduces himself, but she asked him, so he quickly his clothes. But Aoyama sees this, but Sheena says she plans on adding the new people to her painting and wanted better reference. Later, they have dinner, but Kanda notices Yuko's there, to his shock, as she's a new member as well, saying that the number she gave him was a fake one, and she actually passed. And then, Sheena arrives with a painting having added Kana and Iori, but Yuko complains, though Sheena didn't know she was there. Though then, their new neighbor knocks, so Kanda goes, but sees it's Misaki Mitaki, the newlywed, to his shock, who's moved next door and couldn't wait to submit the marriage registration and surprises everyone there. And Kanda then thinks that Sakura Hall still has a variety of colors from before as well as new, and that they each have their own color shining brightly on the canvas of Sakura Hall.